Welcome to Complicated Opportunities, a CosmereRPG podcast with a few more GMs. This week, we're actually going to be doing a roundtable discussion. We have with us, me and Irving are here as usual, but we also have Carsen and Jonathan. I'll let you guys decide if you want to give your last names out or not. But they were some of the GMs that joined us at Nexus as well. So we're going to just have a roundtable discussion about what it's like GMing at conventions and GMing at Dragonsteel Nexus in particular. Guys, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourselves. Carsen, I'll go to you first.
Hi, thank you for having me. Hi, my name's Carsen Potter. I'm a professional game master and I've been a GM for about 10 years now. I love the Cosmere since I first read The Way of Kings a while ago, and so loved the CosmereRPG, jumped on as early as I possibly could, and I love everything about it, love everything they did, so I was very excited to get to Nexus.
Awesome. And Jonathan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, Jonathan Bowe. Thanks for saving the best for last, Kyle. Yeah, I've been GMing, pretty much a forever GM for about 7 years now. This year has been my first year professionally GMing, both at Gen Con and then here at Dragonsteel Nexus about a week ago now.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, that's about right. I'm a little sick, so I will be as quiet as I can help myself, but I'm also here. So yes, they did save the best for last, Jonathan. Thank you very
much. Awesome. Well, so a little bit, and as far as our experiences, this was Irving's first convention professionally GMing, and this was my second. I'm like Jonathan, Gen Con was my first time professional GMing, and then Nexus was the second one. So, yeah, I'll turn it over to you guys. What was your all's experiences like? Feel free to just chime in if there's a little bit of over talking. It's a podcast. Who cares? So yeah, what was it like doing your conventions for the first? Jonathan, I'll go ahead and go to you first, actually. So you started off at Gen Con and then did Nexus. So what was your experience like GMing professionally for the first time this year?
I think it's been really interesting. As far as organization, it's interesting to see as especially for this specific group as they have GMs run stuff like this more often, how things get more organized, which is, I guess, kind of good and bad depending on how you look at it. But it's definitely nice when you're at a table and there are just people bringing you water and things like that, and less things that you have to think about when you want to think about running a game. I think I've learned a lot from GMing professionally, and I think a lot of it translates back to running better home games, but I'll let Carsen talk and try to save some of that for a little bit later.
Sweet. Yeah, Carsen, go ahead.
I want to ditto Jonathan with having a group to organize all of this was amazing. When I've done professional GMing in the past, either at conventions or online, it's always been I'm responsible for the content that I'm in charge of. I'm responsible for myself and all my things, keeping my time right, all of those things. Being at this convention was amazing. We had CJ, the GM for the Loose Cannons on Shroud of Opportunity, was sort of captaining us as GMs and making sure everybody was in the right place at the right time, had everything they needed. We had people walking around bringing us water, like Jonathan mentioned. We had people bringing cough drops, because when you're talking for that long to that many people in that big of a room, you start to lose your voice. It was just amazing to have Brotherwise there running the whole thing and taking care of everything. It made it so much easier to be just focused on the game and what was going on with our players and taking care of the incredible stories that they had presented for us.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's a point I want to ask about. What did you feel the difference between a convention running other games versus running CosmereRPG for Brotherwise? How did that feel, that sort of difference?
I think the biggest difference that I noticed is when I've been at other conventions running Dungeons & Dragons, I have people coming in with their idea of what Dungeons & Dragons is, but without an idea of what the story is. So they'll come in with a character that they've pre-built, that they feel like they know and understand, and sometimes they'll get the rules wrong or they'll understand what the character is, or they'll build something that's more mechanically powerful than the other people at the table. Whereas at this convention, it was really cool because I had people come in who knew nothing about the tabletop role-playing game, even if they'd played D&D or something like that before. But they came in knowing and understanding the story and the world. And so people were so much more interested in what was going on at the table and less interested in what was going on in their character sheets, because they were involved in the world of the books and didn't know anything about the character sheet. So it was teaching different sides of the role-playing game itself. So that was definitely a different experience, and I liked this better, especially with the pre-generated characters sort of keeping everybody mechanically on the same level.
Yeah, I do really think the pre-made characters and then also just having fans of the world first instead of RPG fans was a really interesting experience. I think my best player was a guy who he didn't know what dice were which, but he played his character so perfectly.
Now, Jonathan, Carsen brought up an interesting. Carsen and Irving both brought up an interesting point there about the people knowing the world but not knowing the game. So you got to be at Gen Con with me, and I felt like it was very interesting where Gen Con had people that were there to play TTRPGs. Like they were probably trying out Daggerheart, they were trying out Draw Steel, they were trying out CosmereRPG. So like they knew what the D20 based dice system looked like, but a lot of them had no idea about the Cosmere, where this was the polar opposite. What were your kind of like highlights, differences as far as that goes?
I definitely had a lot more people at Gen Con that were like you said, new to this system, but very familiar with role-playing systems. So they were deep diving more into mechanics. With the exception of a couple of people, I think at Gen Con you get a lot more rules questions of like, hey, how exactly does this thing work, or like something that will never come up in this adventure, but they're curious about the system. And I get excited about that, but it also makes it a little bit harder to keep things in the correct amount of time. So have to be kind of careful with that. That is kind of one thing that I've been thinking about since Dragonsteel that I think ties in here is that, and again, this is something that I think will help me at least with home games as well, is that being kind of a forever GM, and I've basically been a rules lawyer at most of the tables I've been at for the last few years now. Just pretty consistently, I think I'm showing other people systems that they haven't read through that I have, or whatever, or just have read through more of the rule book than they have. And so most of the conversations at my home game tables have turned into like, here's how this rule works, and no, you're not allowed to do that because that's not what the rule book says, or whatever like that. And especially with the CosmereRPG being very new, these convention games have been a lot more of like, try to let people do really cool things, and we're almost selling the game a little bit. So it's a lot of like, if it's at all feasibly possible, even if you're twisting the rules a little bit, we definitely try to keep it accurate to the system and how it should work, but let people have fun and keep things exciting. And I think that's been helpful to just be able to let people do cool things. And like, maybe it's a little questionable. It may or may not be rules as intended, but it's almost definitely not rules as written, but you get to have a lot more fun at the table. And that's been cool in both situations, especially with people that are like, they can understand the core loop of the game of you roll a d20 and you add a number to it very easily, but they're not used to questioning the deep rules of an RPG, and they just get to be excited by, I can be a windrunner that can gravitate my spear towards people or whatever like that.
Awesome.
Now, point of order, both Daggerheart and Draw Steel are not D20 systems. Just so people don't think that we don't know things.
That's fair. That's a good point. Yeah. One of them you're rolling 2d12s, one of them you're rolling 2d10s, but the bones of the system still apply. You do a skill test, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a very good point. No one's
pedantic at us like we all want to be at
yes.
that other podcast.
Yeah. I'm not even going to bother shouting them out. But
yeah.
Yeah. So does anybody else have anything they want to go over as far as just their first experience at a con or at Nexus? This was the first time GMing at Nexus for me. I've played at Nexus, but not GM'd before.
Yeah.
But does anybody else have anything?
I would like to ask sort of the table here. What made you want to GM at Nexus?
For me, it's the system. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kyle.
No, I was going to say the same thing. Like I played at Nexus last year, and that was actually the catalyst for me wanting to GM in general, because I'd always been, an on and off player for the past 15 years. But actually getting to go, I was in the Epic game last year, and I got to do a couple of the, they had these little like 1 hour or really like 45-minute combat demos just to show you what the system looked like last year. So that got me excited about it, backed it, learned how to GM, and then here we are. So it was just kind of like, that was like my goal all year, was to do to be able to run at Nexus. So yeah.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Carson?
as soon as I picked up this system, I knew that I wanted to be able to GM in as many opportunities as possible. I'll admit that getting to go to Nexus for free and getting some of the other rewards that we get as GMs was a consideration. But any opportunity that I have to GM this system, specifically the CosmereRPG, but also the Plot Weaver underlying system, I'm gonna take, because it's such a interesting combination of rules heavy mechanics and interesting narrative mechanics that I feel flow really well together and make for a really interesting story, especially in one-shot scenarios where you've got a really interesting and dynamic one-shot like the ones that they prepared for us at the convention.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a ton to add there. I think the system is incredible. I think this Plot Weaver, in addition to the CosmereRPG at this point, I think has and will completely replace most, if not all, other RPG systems other than occasionally experimenting with something. So getting to play that with other people that are excited about it, whether it's because of the system or the IP that it's in, just getting to share that with people and have any amount of time paid to be able to do something that I would enjoy doing for free otherwise. It's a pretty cool opportunity. And like Carson said, there's a lot of other perks that are definitely nice, but I think I would do it regardless.
Kyle, for you, why did you like? I know you said you wanted to after playing it, but what was like that like jump to like, yeah, I'm gonna go GM at a convention, like an event?
Yeah, so some of it's like I'm just a social person in general, so it's like being able to play the game in person, because here I don't have a lot of opportunities to do that. The majority of my GMing happens through Roll20, Foundry, online. So getting to go present the game, because like, you know, in my like 9 to 5, I do sales. So I love getting in front of people and presenting and teaching and explaining why I'm excited about something. Like that's how I approach sales in general. Probably would have been a teacher at one point in time if I would have wanted to get my master's or my PhD, but I graduated in a recession, so that wasn't in the cards. So yeah, I love the system. I love how easy it was to pick up, because like I don't know that if I would have still just been playing D&D or the Star Wars role-playing game that I would have ever wanted to jump in and run a game. But I'm passionate about the Cosmere, and I do find the system, I want to say it was when we talked to Ross, like someone pointed out that it's a game that's crunchy in between sessions, but during the sessions you just roll with it. Like, so I find it easy to get in front of and play, and I want to see it succeed. I want to see, like, Brotherwise has put a lot of work into this. They've really done a good job of making a system that we're, like, the four of us are passionate about. So, like, I'm not going to lie. I'm also just out there, like, trying to spread the good word of the CosmereRPG and Plot Weaver. Like, I want people to play it, because the more players there are, the more chances we all get to experience it with different players and player types.
Yeah. No, that's a very good shout out. It is. It's a very fun game.
So we'll stay spoiler free. I want to hear what you guys thought about the adventures. Like about Speak the Words, we can go, if we're going to spoil Speak the Words, just mention spoiler ahead of time, because it's published. It's been out since September. Pedal, we're going to stay away from spoiling because it's not a public adventure yet. We don't know if it ever will be, to be honest. They have used it at 2 conventions, but we don't know if they're going to publish it for people to see. So what did you guys think about the adventures and getting to present those to players for the first time?
I think the adventures they've had, for one, it's really cool to be provided with any amount of adventure and not be expected to come in with your own thing. And I don't know that that's a universal experience, but I think they're both incredibly well written, especially for the function that we're using them for at these conventions. Speak the Words does a really good job of giving you like pretty much one of each of the main scene types in the CosmereRPG. So by the end of that session, I feel like you're pretty familiar with how the system works. You've definitely gotten to roll some dice. If we're not really needing to speed through things, you've gotten to have a conversation and do some role playing, as well as interact with endeavors in combat. And I don't even know that this needs to be tagged as a spoiler. It's in the title, but at least one of the characters gets to speak the words and become a radiant. And it's really cool especially if you're playing with people that are familiar with the books, to get to share that experience with them as part of their introduction to the game. And I feel like it's just a really exciting way to dive in and come out of it excited to taste more of the system and get into leveling up and all of that cool stuff that you get to do. Like you mentioned, that kind of crunch between sessions and getting into the exciting parts of the mechanics.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that if you want to get somebody into the Cosmere RPG, what you do is you play Speak the Words with them. It is a excellent example of how the system is meant to work through endeavor to conversation to opportunity or to combat back to a conversation, sort of flowing pretty quickly and pretty smoothly between those as well. And then just every time somebody speaks the words in scene, everybody gets goosebumps and shivers. It's such a powerful narrative moment, and to get to capture that with the pre-generated characters that have these backstories that are so well integrated into the story and the importance of the story, to be able to watch these characters stand there and swear these ideals in defense of family and home is such a cool thing to get to see as a GM that you don't get to see in other things because there's not as, or in other games because there's not as well developed a story and lore and world for these moments to be as impactful and meaningful as they are.
Yeah. Now, how many sessions of each, or like one shot did you guys run? Like I ran 2 pedals and then 1 session of Speak the Words, which was 2 adventures of Speak the Words.
Yeah, I had the same as you were. 2 4-hour sessions of pedals and then 2 2-hour sessions of Speak the Words.
Okay, cool.
And Jonathan, you actually got to run a little extra, didn't you?
Yeah, I think I had 3 sessions of Speak the Words, so that's 3 blocks, so 6 sessions total, and then 1 session of pedals. So got to do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and I had I ran 2 sessions of Speak the Words, so 4 games of that, and then 1 of pedals.
And
what did everybody? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Just to shill Speak the Words a little bit more, and something that I don't think most of us get to experience in home games that was cool for me playing in a convention game was I had a 13-year-old girl who came up with her dad to play at my table. And they had been, for the last year or 2, they'd been working through reading Sanderson's books together. So it was really cool to see. She was playing a Windrunner that's a part of the pre-generated characters, and again, another slight spoiler for Speak the Words, you have to make this decision, and depending on the decision, typically either the Windrunner or someone else will speak the words, and it's very impactful to that character either way when they speak those words. And it was really cool to see because she ends up swearing the first ideal as a Windrunner. She gets this really cool moment where she's flooded with investiture and gets to do all kinds of cool stuff, and her dad is like tearing up with her while she's speaking the words. And then on top of that, it was just exciting to see this 13-year-old girl just like brutally fly up into the air and gravitate her spear down through this enemy. But also just a really cool, emotional, impactful moment as like this family is getting to live through these books that they've been reading together. And I don't think that's something you get to see very often.
Yeah, that's awesome. And actually, that was the question I was going to ask anyway. Was like, does anyone have any cool stories that they want to share from the table that they got to see while we were at Nexus?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. I had some players when we were playing Pedal, and I will be as vague as I can be because we don't want to spoil anything. But they used the grapple mechanics, which, as we all know, are fairly powerful in this system. And like Jonathan was talking about earlier, sometimes you get to be a little flexible with the rules here. They wanted to drag the boss with them as they pass from one room into another room. And normally you're supposed to be sort of fleeing from the boss, and then eventually she catches up to you. But the boss has some really powerful area control and group control dynamic abilities that just go out the window when you are standing in a very small enclosed room surrounded by enemies that all get to take a turn before you. And so they just grabbed her, dragged her into this other room, and then just took a round of just wailing on her. And it completely changed the tone of the fight. It's one of the reasons why I love playing with people who are new to TTRPGs, because they do things that are just so dynamic and interesting and new that you don't get to see from people who have played for a long time, like me, that sort of have an idea of how it's supposed to be done. And so that was really cool to get to watch them sort of realize that this was a thing that they could do and take advantage of it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had anyone think to do that with any boss, let alone that one.
Mhm.
Irving, do you have any that
Yeah.
you're wanting to share from yours?
I had that cool moment in Speak the Words where you're supposed to make this very binary decision, and the players were like, well, and so okay, spoilers for Speak the Words. I'm going to give you like 3 seconds to skip ahead to the next bit. 1, 2, 3. They decided to bring the Soulcaster with them to like go free the singers. Yeah, I said why not, and like obviously they had to make some checks to like convince the general in charge that was a good idea, but their dice were on fire, and it made me have to improvise at the table because it's like, oh well, like 2/3 of this adventure are now dramatically changed. I'm just gonna set the book over here and I'm just gonna wing it, and that was a very fun moment. I ended up setting an event tracker where every time they rolled a complication, they were getting closer to the team that was supposed to go assassinate the Soulcaster showing up.
Right.
And eventually, like, they got down the Nightform Regal, and then the reinforcements showed up. And the entire time they were like, why is nothing happening with my complication? I'm like, oh, you'll see. And that was just so, like, in all the times that we've played Speak the Words, I don't think anyone ever thought to suggest that or attempt it. And we've played it a fair chunk now, because like every time you're going to go to one of these conventions, we test it just to like make sure we're familiar with. And yeah, it was a great time. It was very fun. What did you have any like standout moments?
So the one I have, the group, to say spoiler free for Petals, there is a moment where you're at a party and you have to try to acquire an object from an NPC, and my team decided to seduce him, which if you're reading the character sheet, kind of totally makes sense. So they went all in. They were trying to spike his drink. Then they were playing to his vanity. They just got so into that we probably rolled on that conversation, which normally takes, I don't know, 10 minutes, for like 30 minutes, because they just kept coming up with more ridiculous ways to try to take the item off of this guy that they needed to take. But then, so for Petals, it was definitely just a funny, I only ran it once, but it was a funny moment. But for Speak the Words, like, I'll just echo what everyone else was saying. Like, every time, it was cool that we had so many Sanderson fans at the convention, because at Gen Con, a lot of times my table, like Jonathan said, it was much more like mechanical questions. How does the system do this? How does initiative work? Like, the people that were at the table that were just Sanderson fans, like, almost didn't care. They were just like, you shepherd us through, GM. But every time that we would come up to a moment where one of them got to speak the words, it was just like the whole table getting goosebumps and getting chills, and like one person started tearing up halfway through. It was really cool to see. That just will never get old to me. Seeing someone speak the words live with a group of Sanderson fans, getting to live out those moments we've been reading about since, I think I read Way of Kings for the first time in 2010. So, for 15 years, I've been reading about these characters doing it, and now we're getting to see people do it live, and it's just a great experience. Any other just like anecdotes, fun stories about like actually running at the convention, being in the room, being around other Sanderson fans?
One of the coolest things was the cosplays, having people come in and cosplay to play at our tables. I had a woman come in a gorgeous singer cosplay. I mean, she had committed to this wholeheartedly, full skin painted, and then had like costume, like putty designed carapace bits that were fully painted and detailed. It was a gorgeous costume. And then she sat down and played the female singer in Speak the Words. And that was really cool. And then the next day I had somebody come in a full Sazed cosplay with like earrings and bracelets and everything, and sat down and played a ferrochemist at the table. And it was so cool to see these people come in and embody their characters, not just in the role play, but also like physically. It was a very different experience to what I'm used to.
Jonathan, you've been quiet a minute.
I think to kind of echo what Irving said, I was trying to think of a way to talk about pedals without spoiling a lot of pedals. It starts with an endeavor, pretty classic scene type for the Cosmere RPG, but it's very, I think, unique to Mistborn. And the players get to be really creative and do some cool stuff with the mechanics of the game. That makes sense for that endeavor. And again, I'm sorry, this is very vague. I'm trying not to spoil anything, get myself in trouble. But it's another example, I think, of getting to do some really cool improvised stuff, both as the players and as the GM. The table that I ran pedals with put me in a pretty unique spot in that endeavor, and it was largely because they rolled a complication on the plot die with one of their attempts at doing something, and one of the players suggested something, which again is a cool thing with opportunities and complications, that anyone at the table can get involved and suggest things. And they suggested something that was just wacky. I would never have thought of it, but it was a lot of fun and seemed like fun to play, so we went with it. And then it just, I think, completely changed the scene and like how they progressed into the next scene, because they had to figure out a different set of problems because of the consequences of that complication and things like that, of getting to figure out how to play through something and changing things on the spot, because players get to be involved with the complications and opportunities. And if Pedals gets released when there are more specifics out, you can ask me about what actually happened that caused that.
Fair enough.
I for sure will. Now, kind of on the flip side of like the cool, fun moments, what, like, if you had a problem at your table, how did you handle that? And this is a little pointed because I know for a fact you had an issue one day, Jonathan. So, like,
yeah,
how did resolving that situation go for you?
I'll start by saying this is something that I think I haven't GM'd as an individual at a convention, so I'm sure situations get a lot harder in that case. This is a nice part of working with a group like Brotherwise, is that if things get bad enough, that you can always just pull in other people to handle it, for the most part, that have more authority than you or can talk to the right people or whatever. In my case, it was mostly just that I had a player who felt like they were really familiar with the system and wanted to argue a lot of rules unless you've gotten to do alpha or beta testing. It's pretty hard to be extremely familiar with the rules within a month or two of a game coming out. So it was just a lot of disagreeing on rules, and that's where I think I was still relatively lucky that they were willing to listen to the argument of just like, we're here to have fun and I'm the GM, so we can argue about if it matches the rules later, but this is what we're going with. Definitely a couple times just out of pride where I pulled out my rule book and took the time to flip through and find the rule to prove that I was right, but that I don't know that that's the right answer. Outside of that, I think I was pretty lucky. And I don't think I really had any problematic players, except for, again, just one that was a little too interested in arguing the rules to the point where it slowed down the table quite a bit.
Yeah, I had a similar enough player who pretty much constantly was like, well, I have this thing, so shouldn't it work this way? And I was like, interesting that that's your view. No, not in this case, but I understand where you're coming from. It is kind of a, hey, we're all here to have fun. Bogging down with rules conversations isn't the goal. Yeah.
And I will speak to opinion for half a second, and then I'll get off my high horse. But I feel like it's worth mentioning here. I think it's fun sometimes to talk about rules as written and really try to get into the specifics of how a mechanic should work and how it's written to work. And
there's a time and a place.
Rules as intended is a very subjective thing. It's hard to make it objective, but especially when you're at a table to have fun with people, and especially when you're at a table at a convention and have a time limit. I think it's very often when you're trying to argue something as rules as written to see that it's almost definitely not rules as intended. And even if it is, it's not as fun to play. And I won't try to tie that to anything specific, and you can disagree with me on that if you want. But I think generally, if rules as written, even if you feel like you can take the wording to mean what you think it means, if it doesn't feel fun to play with and you're arguing that you should be allowed to do it even though it doesn't sound fun to play with, maybe it's not the right call, even if it's technically what the words say, because the grammar leans that way.
Yeah, well, it's not Magic the Gathering. There's not a 400-page legalese textbook to understand interaction.
Yeah, that was one of the things I learned at Gen Con, because Gen Con was my first time GMing in person. Every game that I had at Nexus, I just started off with hey, one, just a heads up, if you're here to rules lawyer, I don't think this is the table for you, because we are on a time crunch. A lot of people don't know how to play this, so we're just going to make calls and have fun. Period. I'm not going to get bogged down in a rules conversation. We can always look it up afterwards. That was just something I picked up from Gen Con, because I did have a couple people. One guy, the last day of Gen Con, Johnny had brought the handbook and the world guide into the Cosmere room because they weren't out yet physically. And he kept running over to flip through the rule book to try to find ways around stuff. And it was dude, that's not what we're here for, man. We're just here to have fun today. If we want to rules lawyer later, we can rules lawyer later. So for all those potential players out there, this is not me lecturing, but just for the sake of all of the other players, just come to have fun at a convention. Maybe we can look the rules up afterwards in between.
Yeah.
Carsen, did you have any weird, not weird, but just scenarios that threw you off? Now, you've got a lot more experience GMing at conventions than the rest of us. But yeah, did you have anything interesting come up while you were GMing?
I had the fortunate experience that most of my players were new to the system, so they didn't get rules lawyer around me because they didn't know the rules themselves. It meant that I had to spend a lot of time explaining what is the plot dice and how do actions work, and there were some people that had a really hard time understanding action points and how to spend them and things like that. I think the worst thing that I had to do was I had some players that were trying to be very creative with the narrative elements that didn't fit very well with the rules elements of the game. And there were several times that I had to say, at my table, if we were playing a long-form campaign, this is a really cool, interesting idea. I would probably let it work. This is Brotherwise table. We're going to play by Brotherwise rules today. And everybody was very understanding and accepting of that. So I actually got really fortunate in that I didn't have any problems with anything like that at the tables.
That's good. Yeah, I definitely went into, because I'm very much the GM where if you can convince me it's a fun idea, I don't really care what the rules say. I'm going to do it. I did try to keep it a little more rules as written at the convention, because it is Brotherwise's table. The rule book's literally sitting right around we bought.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably what they intended, so I stayed with that a little. Mind you, they never told us to do that by any stretch. We had the autonomy to just run the table as we wanted to. But yeah, I just kind of felt like it was the right thing to do to hey, let's keep this as close to what it's written as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I had that guy that rules lawyered. I also had a person who asked a question that made me intensely uncomfortable. And that was just awkward. It was kind of you know what? We're not going to talk about that. I don't feel comfortable. If you can explain in a non-inflammatory way why you asked the question that way, I can maybe answer it.
Yeah. Awesome. Does anybody else have anything in general they wanted to share about the convention, about running the games? I'll definitely give Brotherwise their flowers at the end, because honestly, they were a blast to work with. But as far as the convention goes, does anybody else just have anything that they want to talk about?
I don't know if this is the right spot for it, but Carsen mentioned explaining the rules, so I'll throw it out. I think one thing that felt important to me is it's hard to, but worth thinking about how, if you're in a situation where you're GMing at a convention or even just GMing at home with new players, trying to find the right balance between making sure the rules make sense and you're covering them, but also not sitting there for an hour and a half explaining the rules. I think it's a relatively small number of people that would enjoy just talking rules for that long, especially when you're on a time limit at the table. But at the same time, with players, especially that haven't played an RPG before, I don't know that it's enough to just say, when you try to do something, you tell me what you want to do, and then I'll probably have you roll a d20, and then you add a number to that, and then we find out if you succeed or fail. So it felt important to me. Maybe it's not the right answer, but most of my tables, I think I had one or two that everyone there had played the system, or at least played a lot of D&D and didn't really need much rules explanation. But for the most part, I tried to have roughly half an hour of here's the plot die, here's how you roll a d20, here's like how combat will kind of look, and we'll cover more specifics when we get there and things like that, so that they didn't feel like they had a 400-page rule book thrown at them before we even started playing, but it also wasn't just immediately drowning in an ocean because you have no idea what the rules are and what you can even think about doing as you're trying to replicate the narrative.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And like I definitely had like different levels almost every single time. Like I had no clue what was coming at me when people sat down. One table, everyone had played D&D, so they all were familiar enough that I was just able to explain initiative, explain the plot die, and then we just rolled. And then a couple other tables, it was like we're spending 20 to 30 minutes at the beginning just really even lining out. Like when I ask you to roll for athletics, this is what that means. Like when I ask you to do this, this is what that means. Because we had one table where it was like we were about half and half, and we tried to just learn as we go. It needed a little more structure than that, so we kind of backpedaled a smidge to like, hey, let's get some groundwork here. But then one table I had no idea. So that was an easy 30, like definitely a 30-minute conversation to lead off with.
I was really fortunate in that my players who hadn't played RPGs just kind of understood the idea that we're like playing pretend, and they understood the source material. So I almost always, I would explain like, all right, now we're going into what this system calls an endeavor. It's going to work this way. Or, hey, we're going into combat. Here's the initiative system. And it felt very like, hi, I'm a flight attendant. I'm going to read the placard now.
That's a good way to put it, because that's typically what I was doing for the most part. But the one party I had to backpedal a little bit with, we tried to get into the endeavor because Speak the Words kicks off with an endeavor. And when they were just deer in headlights on like, what do I even do? So I did have to come to them and like almost present like, hey, here's like 3 things you can do. Which one of these would you like to do? Like, let me see your character sheet. Okay, your character's good at this, this, and this. Is there something that would trigger to make you think, oh, let me try to do this? For the most part, though, it was very much able to be like, this is what the CosmereRPG calls an endeavor. This is how it's going to work, and now let's try it.
Yeah.
But I definitely had one that they panicked.
To shill a little bit more for Brotherwise, the one-shots did an excellent job of giving you options. It would say, here's your goal. They can do anything they want. But here's a couple of things they might try, the DCs and the skill checks that you might roll for that, and the opportunities that might come with. And that was really helpful for new players for me to be able to say, like, you can do whatever you want. I have a few options if you're confused and if you want help. That was really...
Yeah, there were a couple times I had to, like, step in and, a guy brought his partner with him who, like, either was not interested in RPGs or, like, not as interested in the Cosmere. And it was like, yeah, okay, I'm going to help you run your character. Unfortunately, you picked Strafina because you like her outfit, and I think she's one of the more complicated characters in this adventure to make useful.
For sure.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, is there anything else anybody wants to add before we start to close it out? Awesome. All right. Well, I am going to give Brotherwise a shout out. Like Carsen said, like I haven't ran a lot of pre-written adventures, but from what I've gathered from other people, like them giving shout outs to like, hey, here's a skill test to try. Here's this. Here's a sample DC. Like it makes it from a GM perspective very easy to run at a convention. The adventures were definitely built very well to run at a convention. I agree with Carsen. Speak the Words is like the perfect, hey, if you want a one-shot to see if you're going to like this system, let's try this one. And then just as far as the overall like organization structure, having CJ there to like kind of lead the way and get us together ahead of time. So that way we had a decent experience of what to understand. And honestly, like from someone who's in management, I also appreciated that afterwards CJ was like, hey, let's get some feedback too, so how we can do it even better next time. Because I'm sure Jonathan could agree, even running at Gen Con and then 6 months later running at Nexus, like the experience improved dramatically. Not that Gen Con was bad by any stretch, but it was just like you can tell Brotherwise was like, hey, let's get feedback and let's apply it. That way we can keep making this experience better for everybody that wants to run at the convention. So
yeah, I think they did a great job of making it approachable. Just to be contentious, I think I disagree with you guys that Speak the Words is the intro adventure I would pick. I think I think Bridge 9 is, because I think for new people, starting at level 1 is kind of important to see if they like the system.
See, I'm
But
thinking more of like if I walked into my game store, my local game store where people have played D&D before, like Speak the Words is going to give you like, here's the magic system, here's the because like it's in level 1, like nobody's radiant, you don't really have any of the magic system in there, like because I'm thinking of someone who's played D&D for 20 years, they're going to want to know like how cool can this thing get,
yeah,
and it gives
I'll
you
have
all
to
three.
I'll have to try running Speak the Words with my tabletop group because they really liked Bridge 9, but they are as un-Cosmere aware as you can be.
I also like the length of Speak the Words for it too, where it's like, hey, you're only committing to like an hour and a half versus Bridge 9. If you're going to run Beginning Dan, it's going to be anywhere from what 3 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
So
I feel
yeah,
like that's a pretty standard like at-home game time though.
well, but I'm not thinking at home because I don't have an at home group. I don't have a group
That's
that's
fair.
like, I'm thinking about the comic shop in Bridgeport. If I'm like, hey, you guys got like an hour and a half, I can show you what this system looks like. And I've got pre-gens and I've got this. If you guys want to do this, they're probably not going to commit to a 3 to 4 hour game because they're not used to playing with me. I'm not used to playing with them, but they might want to try it out. That's kind of what I'm thinking of, which is what I think of as at a convention too.
That's a good point.
Especially with Cosmere, like with Nexus, because you've got a lot of people that don't play them. So like, I felt like the people in pedals, it was like, okay, this is a lot. Like we're learning a lot in 3 to 4 hours. Whereas Speak the Words is a little quicker adventure.
True.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the group you're looking at. Like for home games, if it were my standard RPG group that I'm trying to introduce to the system, I'd probably just jump into Bridge 9. It's a longer form adventure. It has more story hooks if you want to build off of it. Still kind of introduces you to Radiant stuff in a cool narrative way, but without being level 3 characters that are potentially already Radiant or about to be Radiant. But I also have a number of people that have never played RPGs before, but have read Sanderson's books that are pretty close to me. And if they were like, hey, I'm kind of interested in this RPG stuff that you talk about all the time, I'd almost definitely choose Speak the Words because level 3 is still simple enough with them mostly being heroic that you could pick it up and I could have one experienced player at the table playing Radiant or whatever. And I think it has a lot more interesting tie-ins to the world to potentially get people hooked and bring in new meat to the system, if you will.
Now,
I
mind
will
you,
have to test this and like see if I can run it for my stepdad and stepbrother that read the books but have never played D&D.
yeah, because now I definitely think if you get to the end of Speak the Words and they're like, oh, that's cool, I'm like, awesome. Because I actually will use Bridge 9 to start stuff like Stonewalkers. Like you can do it. To me, it's like once they're on the hook, it's like, all right, cool, let's run Bridge 9. Because I love Bridge 9, but it is a longer adventure. If somebody's not used to playing a TTRPG, they might get bogged down with a lot over that long of a period of time.
This also seems like a good opportunity to shill the first step. Because I think my personal flow, if I were trying to get people that are not into RPGs but are into the series, would be Speak the Words, and then if they enjoy that, going into the first step as a cool. I think it's a cool way to be like, you might have some idea of a character in mind, but you don't have to know how the system works to build a character, and you don't necessarily have to know all the questions to think about beforehand. We just get to have fun playing, and at the end, you have most of a character sheet with a few questions to go finish filling it out. Just a, I think, more narrative way to do a session 0, but also continue giving people kind of a soft introduction to the system without requiring a hard, we're going to sit down for 2 to 4 hours and think through all the questions for your character and how you connect to someone else.
Yeah, I think at time of recording, was it the episode that most recently released or the one that's coming out where we talked about Speak the Word, our first step?
I think it's the one that comes out Wednesday. So at time of recording, the episode where we talk about the first step will be out on Wednesday, I think.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, sweet,
All right.
guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for like adding opinions and viewpoints that we don't necessarily have. I think that's really it from us. This podcast has been brought to you by Hall's Cough Drops. I think we all subsided on those pretty much the whole weekend.
Absolutely.
100%.
So, not an actual sponsor, but we wish. Thank you
Yep.
very much. And Kyle, you want to take us away?
So let's roll our plot die and raise the stakes. This has been Complicated Opportunities.